Yes, people, welcome back to GNA TV. I hope you guys are well, wherever it is that you may be around the world. And yeah, before we get into it, before we even introduce Ben himself, let's cue that intro. Yes, people, welcome back to GNA TV. I hope you guys are well. And yes, like I promised you guys, special guest has arrived, has joined me in the name of Ben Jacobs, CBS's Ben Jacobs. How are we doing, Ben?
Very well. How are you?
All good, mate. Excited for the transfer window, which I thought was open on the 8th, but now I'm being told it's this. Is it on the Friday that the transfer window's open?
I think that it officially opens on the 10th.
The 10th. Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Guys, you know specifically what we're going to be talking about. Everything Chelsea. You know, if you've got comments, bring them up, and we'll try and see if we can get into them. We have got a lot that we need to go through. Ben's not got loads of time as well, so we're going to try and fly through some areas that have been quite interesting, especially over the couple of weeks at Chelsea. And I want to start with Ben. What I want to start with is mainly the sanctions process. Really, your thoughts on that, because a lot of Chelsea fans felt that it was a long-winded process. Some others feel that the process was quite fast and it was dealt with quite quickly. You being sort of in the mix of it and understanding more than most what was going on, what were your thoughts on the whole process?
It's a good question. I mean, the process was fast, but complicated and had a lot of dramatic twists. So, therefore, when you're a fan looking at it from the outside in, it was naturally quite a frustrating and uncertain period for the club. But make no mistake, a normal takeover usually would require 9 months as a bare minimum. The due diligence alone could take 3 or 4 months, and all the negotiation before that, and then the regulatory aspects and box ticks after added up. You wouldn't expect to do a takeover if you made an offer for a football club today until somewhere close to February or March next year. So the sale in 85 days is incredibly quick. And one of the reasons for that is because the process was treated more like a tender and bids were invited. And Rain Group, who were publicly speaking silent throughout the process, may well have come under criticism because they changed the process. They had to deal with a high volume of bidders. There was a pullout from the Ricketts family. There was back and forth between the club, Rain Group, and both the bidders and ultimately the government as well. So all of that obviously made the clarity of what was going on at speed relatively tough to determine. But fundamentally, if you look at it retrospectively, Chelsea Football Club under trying circumstances was sold in 85 days. So that is quick. And they've got an exciting and ambitious and sustainable new ownership group. So if you comb through how everything transpired and what changed and all of the different hurdles and possibilities and scares and twists, then naturally you think, yikes, that was exhausting. And it was to cover as a journalist as well. But if you just look at the end result, which is a sale in 85 days, that's incredible. And given the challenges and the different players and the volume of interest and the sanctions against Abramovich, when you actually look at all of that together, the fact it happened and on time is still an incredible job by everybody connected. And by everyone connected, I mean Rain Group, who put together the structure, Chelsea's existing executives who oversaw the process, the successful bidder, they had their challenges and were also in the dark at times, and even the government as well. Everyone worked around the clock to get it done in 85 days. So even though that's not much comfort to those that were exhausted, tired, confused, worried during the process, it's all in the past now. And again, the fact that sale was done in 85 days, that is extraordinary and also quick, despite the drama and the hurdles that we saw over the course of that 85 days before it was done.
100% makes sense. In terms of the consortium itself, Todd Boehly's consortium, what are your overall thoughts on them and their sort of their ideas? I know we're yet to see that anyway in terms of what their targets in the summer windows, and we're going to talk about individuals and personnel soon. But as Todd Boehly as the individual, the partners that he's brought on as well. Do you think Chelsea fans should be looking at it as like a bit of an excitement thing?
I think it's very different to Roman Abramovich, and it depends how you define excitement. If you define excitement based solely on trophies, then fans may have to be a little bit more patient. And that's not to say, by the way, that trophies won't come next season. Of course, that's the aim on all fronts. But naturally, people will look at the Abramovich era collectively, and then they will take the Boehly era more episodically based on what they see over the coming weeks. So if you only gave Abramovich one season, his first season, regardless of what was won and what wasn't, and then you compare that to Boehly, it's likely that Abramovich would have been a little bit more aggressive financially speaking. But the whole point of the Boehly era is to lay foundations at the football club that will lead to long-term success and sustainability. And success gets fans excited. Sustainability doesn't always, but it's what your football club needs in the modern era. So it would be unfair to take the Abramovich era in terms of cumulative finances and trophies won and compare that to the Boehly group now, because one is building something new and different based on a new model, and the other has already got that success and thus the sentiment of the fan base. So I think the main point to emphasize is that the Clearlake Boehly group will be different to Abramovich, and yet their main aim is still to maintain the on-field success and trophies. So the spending this window will probably continue the strategy and plans of the previous regime. And then when you move into new windows, I still expect Clearlake Boehly to remain ambitious on the football side. But what they're not going to do, which Abramovich was almost trademarked for, is be cutthroat with managers, with players, and even with finances. And sometimes that approach can work, but the danger is if you keep changing your manager, if you keep pushing money into a football club, and each time there's a new strategy and approach, but the same scores of cash, then you end up with big squads with different philosophies, with different personalities, and not really much of a dressing room unity or culture fit, because a player that worked for one manager becomes surplus to requirements. A young player that was bought because there was the opportunity doesn't see a pathway. And under Clearlake Boehly, even though this isn't as sexy, they will aim to create that structure behind the scenes that leads to trophies and success, but also allows the football club to be far more sustainable. And therefore, the main aims away from just winning trophies is to be more transparent as a football club, to be more sustainable as a football club, to have a people fit and a culture fit. They want young players to feel like coming to Chelsea will give them different options. The end goal is obviously getting into the men or the women's team, but if you don't succeed, there's pathways elsewhere. So there needs to be that connection between academy and first team, between being loaned out and coming back to the first team. There needs to obviously be a modernization of the football club as well, away from just winning trophies, and that's where the development of Stamford Bridge is a key part. So again, this is a ownership group in for the long term. And fans may judge them in the short term, and those that pay their hard-earned money are fully entitled to do that. And if they don't see a improvement on the football field, getting the team from third up to challenging towards Manchester City and Liverpool, if they don't see continued finals and trophies, then they probably will in the short term say it's not as good as it was under Abramovich. But I actually think it will be better than it is or was under Abramovich, simply because there's a plan. And within that plan, Clearlake Boehly will be prepared to talk about that and engage with the fan base and make sure that those who are connected to the club, whether that's the manager, the players, an executive, a fan group, or just an individual, they're all aware of what direction the club is heading in. Right. And therefore, if you flash forwards to 5 years' time or 10 years' time, I think you see a Chelsea Football Club that's more connected with its fan base, that's more sustainable, that has balanced books, that has a happier dressing room and kind of wider football community, and still spends money and contends for trophies. So all of this suggests that the club is heading in the right direction. But the difference between Abramovich and this group is that Clearlake, Boehly are also thinking about Chelsea, not just as a football club looking for success on the men and women's front, but also a business and a brand. And unfortunately, from the ownership's point of view, fans are not always patient, and words like sustainability, modernization, people fit, they sound very HR-y, very businessy, and fans are like, yes, but who are we signing and when are we going to win trophies? And that's perfectly understandable. Abramovich is probably going to be a better owner in that respect because he was prepared to take big swings, which either hit home runs or strikeouts. This is not a cutthroat ownership group. And as a consequence, fans are going to have to believe in their strategy and maybe be a little bit more patient. But luckily for the new ownership group, they're inheriting a very good football club. If they sustain that very good football club, they'll continue to challenge for trophies from the word go.
I think one of the, and I always say this, I say this on Twitter when I'm in spaces, when we're talking in a Chelsea space with many Chelsea fans, it's about us being able to switch our mindset from the Roman era and allowing to give time to the Todd Boehly era. And that, like you said, I always say this, we are quite spoiled fans. I think we have been quite spoiled fans. When you look at what, the way Roman sort of acted over the course of the years that he's been in charge of Chelsea, it's been a very thing of, if things don't work, it's easy to just flush out, and flushing out meaning get rid of the managers and then, bringing a new manager who then becomes successful. But then, like you said, there's no progression with them because we tend to not back them, is what I feel and see when you look at the board and how they've acted with the Contes, with, the Mourinho's first and second, especially the second time, etc., etc. So yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely something that we need to be patient on, and I'm willing to wait it out. And I think he has got a hard job in his hands. I think it's the whole thing of balancing it all as well, which is the real key as well. So it's going to be interesting because this summer window, I've said it a number of times already on my own show, that I feel like we're going to have to be aggressive in a way. I feel being forced into having to be aggressive. When you look at Rudiger and Christensen leaving, Lukaku looks like it could be gone. There's talks about Christian Pulisic. Is Werner going to stay? Ziyech? And ultimately, that's where we're going to go to next, which is talking about the summer, Chelsea's summer window and how they're going to approach it. Who are their targets? And I want to start with Jules Kounde, because someone that is, some people who thought that he should have been a Chelsea player last year. Sevilla decided to change their mind, asked for the full amount. Chelsea pull out. We don't get Kounde, and it seemed to look like he was very, from what I saw on Twitter in the comments, seemed to be slightly annoyed about this year. It seems like he's certain to leave Sevilla, Chelsea being the place. What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel he'll be one of Chelsea's first signings through the door?
I think so. That deal is close. He's been in London. The clubs had already engaged long before Clearlake Boehly came in. And that's because, as you say, it was a failed transfer last summer. And in fairness to Kounde, I think he handled it very well. He'd spoken publicly on that deal falling through and effectively said he thought it was going to happen when it didn't. And there was the U-turn. He was quite level-headed about it. And that will probably only make Chelsea under the new ownership group more excited, because what you get in Kounde, in to some extent contrast to Dembele, is a young, level-headed footballer that is going to fit immediately into the dressing room. I'm not saying that Dembele won't, but it's obvious that Dembele comes with a little bit more swagger, which can be very positive as well as at times negative. Kounde, by all accounts, is extremely level-headed. And I remember talking to a few people connected to him at Bordeaux, and they said all he wants to do is play football. And when he's on the football field, he's got this immense, almost eerie focus, doesn't get easily rattled, but is always up for the fight. And off the field, it's very similar. He's a model professional by all accounts, still only at the age of 23. And I think that Chelsea see that he's got strong positional sense, intelligence, and would just be a good fit. And that's ultimately why they've been chasing Kounde for the best part of a year. So it's obvious that Chelsea need to address the centre-back position because of some of the departures that you mentioned. And you look at the starting lineup and who might play where. And when you're trying to determine centre-back, you're basically just saying Thiago Silva. And it's natural that they need somebody else, and young as well. And it's great that, for example, a player like Chilwell at fullback, or obviously can play in midfield as well, returns to the side. So there are some young defenders or defensive-minded players at Chelsea in the mix that will be there for the long term, with Chilwell being one of them, but not in that centre-back position. So really, Chelsea are screaming for a young, long-term, intelligent centre-back that can learn from somebody like Silva and take the next step in his career. And Kounde is excited by the move. We know that he's been in London. Terms are not a problem on that deal as far as personal terms with the player. So that's a deal that I expect to happen. It's very close. And I think it's one that Chelsea fans can be excited by, because even though he's perhaps not under that category of marquee signing, still a player that's won 10 caps for France, has played over 100 times for Sevilla, can weigh in with the odd goal, doesn't score too many, but comes forwards for set pieces. Height's not necessarily on his side. I think he's only 5'10", so you're not looking at that kind of box-to-box style defender that can just come up for every set piece and be commanding aerially, but he's got good ball control and positional sense, and he does also chip in with the odd goal and still make a nuisance of himself in both boxes as well when given the opportunity to get forward. So I think this is a signing that will happen for Chelsea. And obviously, as you alluded to, that centre-back position is an area really, because they've been forced to be due to the departures rather than only out of choice, where Chelsea desperately need to strengthen.
I'm excited as a Chelsea fan for Jules Kounde to come to Chelsea. He's someone that I've wanted for a long time. And I do feel that when you look at the player's ability and what Thomas Tuchel requires in the system that he plays and the way that we like to play, I feel that Jules Kounde is one of them players that would suit the way, suit the way we play, we play basically. And I think we can get a better Jules Kounde. The one thing I would say with Thomas Tuchel is that he's got a habit, when you look at since he's come into Chelsea, of bringing the best out of players that are maybe not actually that great. And I think the only issue with what we found at the end of this season is that unfortunately some of them players were just not consistent enough to provide that same level of performance. And why I feel that a lot of players in this team, you could argue, need to leave, and why we need to have a very good summer window. But I always say a smart summer window. It's important that we have a smart summer window and don't go and spend 120 odd million or 100 million on a big signing and blow the budget that we've been given. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But in terms of other centre-back links, obviously there's one there in Jules Kounde. It looks like it's going to happen. Is there anyone else? Because, I mean, Christensen and Rudiger have both left. Chelsea need strength in depth as well. And you look at Rudiger's position as well. I feel Kounde would probably play as the right centre-back next to Silva if we play the three at the back. But it still leaves that gaping area where Rudiger, who was so important to Chelsea last season, is now left on his way to Real Madrid. Have you heard of any other links? Because I know Koulibaly's been spoke about, the guy from Leipzig as well. What are your thoughts?
There's a few currently being considered, and I think that is because Chelsea are going to be forced to bring in more than one centre-back for the point that you make about Rudiger specifically. And remember, Kounde is only 23, so there's room for improvement, but Thomas Tuchel might want somebody with a little bit more experience. With Kounde, like I say, he's a very cultured centre-back, and what's kind of exciting about him is that potential to develop and really show leadership at the back and learn from Silva. And if Silva plays as well, he can get a little bit more forwards because Silva will be the one to hold more. And make no mistake, by the way, Kounde does have all of the assets necessary. I say the height's only 5'10", but he reminds me when he jumps of almost like a Tim Cahill, even though they're completely different players. He does have that ability to leap high and, as I've already said, make a nuisance of himself in both boxes. But maybe the difference with, say, Rudiger is Rudiger will still, statistically speaking, chip in with a few more goals per season. So then you look at the other defensive options, and obviously Delete has once again resurfaced. There's nothing advanced there, but if you look at the old regime, a name that has always been on Chelsea's radar, Koulibaly is another one, and also Vardiol is the third defender that Chelsea have been looking at. And in his case, the transfer fee is a lot higher. And I don't think that Chelsea will pay the fee that is currently being reported, because Kounde is even though there's a release clause there of, I believe off the top of my head, 68, 69 million. I think the price will be closer to 45 or 50, and Chelsea won't therefore have to formally activate the release clause listed in the contract. Whereas with Vardiel, who's only 20 and would be a tremendous signing, Leipzig are probably going to be asking something in the region of 75 to 85 million, and Manchester United and a number of other clubs are circling. But his advantage, again, is that there's that versatility. He can play centre back, he can play right back, he has pace, physicality, has won international caps, has played in a variety of different systems. So another really good signing. But are Chelsea, knowing they need to strengthen in the midfield, knowing they need to, in all likelihood, replace Lukaku, are they going to spend 85 million on Vardiel and then 45 to 50 million on Kounde? It suddenly means that, one, players are going to have to leave with fees to finance that, and two, you could start with 120 to 140 million spent solely on centre backs or versatile defenders, and then still need to find more money to get two names in, I would say, one in midfield and one to replace Lukaku. So then when you do the maths in your head to get the quality Chelsea need and to add marquee signings, you're suddenly looking at 200 to 250 million of spending, which means that outgoings and big fees for those players are going to be needed. I'm not saying that Clearlake Boehly wouldn't spend that amount, but my understanding is that from the previous regime under Abramovich, the allocated spend for the summer was around 150 million, 100 to 150 million, plus any income that potentially comes in from outgoings. Now, the Abramovich regime probably didn't anticipate the number of outgoings. They were confident 6 months ago of, for example, keeping Rudiger. So some of these players, unfortunately, from Chelsea's point of view, are leaving on freeze, and as a consequence, they've not even got the fees needed to offset any incomings. But there's also a necessity to spend a bit more, because if you get a high volume of outgoings on freeze, you've still got to replace them and at the same quality. So when you do the maths right now as to what Chelsea need and who's leaving, the challenge is, yikes, to get players in the market they're being linked with, and let's say at the volume of 4, so 2 in defence, probably centre-backs or players that can at least play centre-back, right-backs or centre-backs, at least 1 in midfield because of the sort of ageing nature of Kante, Jorginho and so on, and then a Lukaku replacement. If you call them your core 4, then already, even getting realistic targets at sensible prices, you're still looking at 4 lots of 50 odd million as an average, so 200 million in spending. And that is a little bit higher than the allocated spend. So it's going to be interesting to see how Chelsea navigate the market. And that's the challenge with a player like Vardiel. Young, huge potential, a great signing, but not necessarily someone that will be thrown into every single game from the word go. And then as soon as you say one for the future at that price, or one that would have to hit the ground running if he plays immediately, then you're going, yikes, that's a big proportion of my allocated spend to put on somebody like him. And that's why I think that Chelsea are going to have to be very savvy in the market, and a name like Vardiel may be more unrealistic than other targets simply because of the price tag hanging over his head.
You're spot on. It's definitely an area that we've been forced into having to sort out, and one of the reasons why I thought Vardiel wouldn't be an option is what you said there in terms of price tag. Kounde, with his experience, I would feel personally would be a better suitor. All right, not for the long term, but for sort of the short term area. But you listed 2 defenders, a central midfielder, and replacement of Lukaku. Thing is, Ben, I just don't feel that. When I look at this squad, I think there's more needed. And I know we're not going to be able to get it all done in the window. You look at what Tuchel wanted last year in a right wing back and Hakimi, and having the backup for Reece James, because of, I feel he gets overplayed. And part of the reason why he got injured last season was because he was forced to play in so many different positions because of the amount of injuries that we did have. And that's another area stage Chelsea will probably have to look to sort out, along with not just Lukaku. I think there's a number of forwards that we still need to maybe replace as well. And it's going to be interesting to see how Boehly sort of works that with Tuchel as well. But the next sort of area I wanted to move on to was the central midfield area. Obviously, we know Tchouaméni, who looks like he's going Real Madrid. Fabrizio Romano's come out yesterday saying that he looks pretty close to being that case. Declan Rice news has kind of sort of, I'd say, died off a little bit. The price tag that West Ham were asking for him was quite heavy. And then there's been news around sort of Basuma potentially being an option. Obviously, we know he's got that court case going on still as well. Where does he stand with that? I don't know. And then players like Sangare as well. So what's your thoughts on Chelsea in the midfield area? Have you heard anything in regards to maybe potentials that they are quite interested in bringing in?
Well, I think the first thing to say, not specific to the midfield, but when you made that point about Chelsea needing other areas strengthened, let's not forget the type of players that they've got that have been loaned out, that have had good seasons, who deserve a chance and can add that depth. And two of them, in my opinion, would be Broja, who, as I understand it, Tuchel wants to look at in pre-season, and Gallagher as well, who started the season on fire, faded a little bit. But it's always a shame, I think, when a player, especially if they stay on loan in the Premier League and do well, doesn't get the opportunity to come back to their parent club. And unfortunately, Chelsea have had a history of this, of letting a player go either out on loan or elsewhere, them finding they excel and kind of saying, hang on a minute, perhaps we should have taken them back. And, you know, in Lukaku's case, in his earlier career, we saw him go out on loan and score goals for fun and still not get opportunities. Tammy Abraham is another good example, has done ever so well at Roma, and now Premier League clubs are circling back again. And you think to yourself, well, was that loanee, and I'm specifically now talking about Gallagher and Broja, worth just shipping out and eventually selling versus trying to integrate? And that's where you find the cutthroat mentality of Abramovich in changing managers, and then that manager has a different opinion, send him out on loan, we'll wait and see, we'll assess, perhaps not quite the finished product, we'll send him out on loan again, or we'll buy him. And they never really get integrated in the first team. And I think when you have a player of the potential of Gallagher and potentially Broja, especially when they play around the quality that Chelsea have got, I think that's worth exploring rather than looking at other options. And then coming back to the midfield, there's a lot of names mentioned with Chelsea, and clearly they need to find someone in that Kante style position, because Chelsea fans know at his peak, as do Leicester ones, how good and how rare it is to find a player that good, a Kante style player can be at their peak. And Chelsea had that with Makelele as well. Arsenal had that with Vieira. And I think that if Chelsea were looking to raid in that area, Leipzig, you would explore Hadara, who has got all the attributes to kind of step in and replace a player like Kante, who is loved by the Chelsea fan base, but I think everyone accepts now that he's just crossed over his peak to the point where he will need replacing. And Jorginho arguably falls into that category as well. So then the Brighton midfielder Basuma is certainly somebody that Chelsea have looked at in the past, but there's a lot of other competition. And Chelsea, as I understand it, are not front runners or actively engaged to try and get Basuma comparative to other rivals. So Arsenal is a more likely destination for Basuma, but Dan Ashworth, the former director of football at Brighton, has just gone to Newcastle, and they are a club interested in Basuma as well, even though they've actually got a fair few players in that position, because Bruno had a great end to the season and Joe Linton as well refound his form under Eddie Howe. But Basuma is a player on Newcastle's radar as well. I think that Arsenal is a more likely destination for Basuma as things currently stand. So Chelsea have got some work to do in the midfield department. Obviously, Dembele is another player that we know that Chelsea have advanced talks with. So he is probably the most likely arrival in terms of strengthening. And it'll be interesting to see where that one progresses.
What about Declan Rice? Because again, do you feel that's something where he'll probably hang out for a year maybe at West Ham? Or do you feel that because no one's entertaining West Ham for the price tag, that a Declan Rice to Chelsea, for example, this summer window is impossible? Because one of the things I heard with Todd Boehly is that he is thinking about making big sort of marquee statement signings. And when you look at Declan Rice and the position that he plays, a lot of people do rate him quite highly there. What are your thoughts on Declan Rice?
Yeah, Rice is an interesting one. I mean, obviously, when we talk about Dembele and that deal being close, or very, very loosely Sterling, who reportedly has been offered to Chelsea, but I don't think there's too much substance in that. But those are sort of wingers come forwards. So, yeah, if you sign Dembele, you strengthen your midfield, but you don't strengthen the Kante style part of the midfield. And Dembele is a marquee signing. So the first part of your question, if the Clear Lake Boehly Group want to make a statement, then bringing Dembele to the football club does exactly that, because he's a tremendous talent with still a bunch of untapped potential, and he's only 25 years of age. But that still doesn't solve that problem of the central midfield, the box-to-box midfielder, the defensive midfielder, the explosive midfielder, the central midfielder, whatever way you want to look at it and whatever system you want to put him in. So then when you look at Rice, Chelsea's old regime had made no secret of the fact that that's a player that they want. But the transfer fee is extortionate, and West Ham United at this stage are just not compelled to sell. So I think that nobody is going to get Rice this summer, period. And whether Rice tries to manufacture that move, or whether a club comes in with an astronomical offer, it won't at the moment meet West Ham United's valuation. And because of that, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to get Rice. So Chelsea need to be smart in the market and lay down the foundations to allow that move to happen either in January or the following summer, with the following summer being far more likely, because West Ham are simply playing hard ball. And I remember when Riyad Mahrez was linked with Chelsea and actually left an Algeria training camp to try and facilitate a move. And Mahrez said it, and his people said it, that he was going to force a move to, in all likelihood, Chelsea. And Leicester just said no, because we've not had some insane astronomical offer. And at this point, we're not compelled to sell. And it didn't matter what Mahrez did, including leaving a training camp, telling the media that he was moving, having his agent put all kinds of news and rumors out there that sort of had half-truths to them, but were not factoring in the Leicester perspective. And West Ham's ownership group are the same. They've put their foot down on this, and they've effectively said that Rice is not for sale. So then someone's either got to come in with an offer so astronomical that West Ham say, well, this is just a no-brainer. But that offer is not 100 million. It's not 105 million. It's not 120 million. It would probably have to be in excess of 150 million to make West Ham say, well, yikes, we have no choice now but to accept this offer because it's so crazily above market value. And I just don't think there's a club out there in the Premier League that would spend that amount of money in the current climate. So Rice will be linked, and clubs will make inquiries, and Chelsea are one of them. And yes, they want Declan Rice, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen this summer. If it doesn't happen this summer, it won't be because Chelsea have failed. It will be because West Ham have just stayed true to their word of being bullishly adamant that they don't want to sell him. And that's still the state of play.
Does it make it a lot harder if Tuchel wants to know? That's the thing, isn't it? You know, showing back into the manager is something that we're hearing Todd Boehly wants to do. And if Tuchel believes Declan Rice is a big answer to where he wants to go, like not doing that, is that again? Do you get what I mean? Sort of thing with Tuchel and the Rice scenario. Because if Tuchel wants a certain profile player to move forward, would it not be an issue not to show that back in and end up giving him the other options, which is ideally what we've done under the Roman era when you think about the board and for example, the Haaland and Lukaku scenario, which is something that's become quite interesting.
I mean, Tuchel can say he wants a player, and that isn't factoring in the deal-breaking aspect to it. So it's important to understand that any smart owner listens to their manager, and Boehly will meet with Tuchel repeatedly over the coming weeks, and Emma Hayes as well. So he will listen, and then he will use the current recruitment model at the club to see what is feasible and realistic. And if Boehly comes back to Tuchel and says, listen, we've tried, we've offered a fair rate, we've gone in excess of our allocated transfer budget, and West Ham are still not budging, then that's not a failure of Clearlake Boehly. And if Tuchel is riled by that or frustrated by that, then that is not an appropriate reaction. It'd be different if Rice becomes available or another club makes an offer in the ballpark of what Chelsea are prepared to spend, and then that other club succeeds. And that's the sort of Arsenal problem at the moment, is they're going for players that end up being available in the market. Vlahovic is a good example of that, and they're not getting that player. So then you have to start saying, well, where is that breakdown behind the scenes? What led to them missing out on that player? Was it the way they courted that player? Was it what they bid? Was it how early they tried to line up the deal? Because most clubs for a big name player like a Rice will be working 1 or 2 windows ahead to sort of court the player and line things up. They're not as spontaneous as you think. So it's not just a case of the new ownership group writing to West Ham and saying, what do we have to pay to get this player because we think he wants to join us and we've got the money. There's a lot more finesse to it behind the scenes. So I think that if you're Boehly right now, and you know that Rice is valued at roughly 150 million, but the price could drop a little bit lower to 130 million or 115 million. If you're the Boehly group, the starting point there, well, there's 2 starting points. The first starting point is to go to Rice's people and work out whether he's open to a deal. And the answer to that from Chelsea's perspective is yes. The second aspect is, can you afford the personal terms? And again, the answer to that is yes. And then the third aspect is, are West Ham going to sell? And if you do the first 2 parts and then go to West Ham and say, what do we have to give you to get Declan Rice? If West Ham say he's got 2 years left on his contract and you can't give us anything, then you can come back with a firm offer at a specific amount and see if they're bluffing. But if you then put down 120 to 150 million and West Ham United still say not for sale, we don't accept that, there's only so far the ownership group can go. And Boehly can make that point to Tuchel. And as an experienced manager, Thomas Tuchel, who will have been in this position many times as a manager with targets, will understand that. The challenge is if there becomes a threshold financially when West Ham will sell. And let's say that drops from 150 million to 110 million or 95 million, which should be a bargain for Declan Rice. At that point, once he becomes market value and you think West Ham will accept that, everyone interested in Rice will circle around that price. And then it's about how you pitch to the player. It's about how quickly you move in the market. And that's when ownership groups can fail, because others act quicker, or another club gets wind of a price drop before you. They get in an offer quickly, they get it accepted, and so on. So that's the sort of finesse of the deal. But right now, it's not there. Boehly, as owner of Chelsea, through his people anyway, could be going to West Ham and saying, here's 120 million. And West Ham could be saying, sorry, we've told you many, many times, you want to give us 120 million in January or next summer? Be our guest, we'll consider it. But right now, not for sale. And that's the roadblock in the deal. And Chelsea and every other club at the moment with Rice are sort of just banging their head against a brick wall. No matter how far you get in the deal, if you don't get a price agreed with West Ham specifically for this summer, you're wasting your time.
Yeah, it just sounds like they're not willing to sell him yet, and why I feel maybe that his contract may need to be run down a bit more before negotiations and agreement between any club, not just Chelsea, before Declan Rice can be done. But yeah, I agree. Also, there's talks about Jorginho potentially. Maybe they're on their 1 years as well with Kante. Are they going to stay? Are they going to go? Could be another area we're forced into having to actually find someone to bring in. We'll have to see what happens at a later stage with that. But I want to move away and onto the forward line, and I want to talk about Christian Pulisic, because there's been a lot of news in and around him. Apparently, Liverpool, Klopp's a big fan of him. They're looking to replace him with potentially Mane as well. Seems to be picking up a lot of heat. I just want to know if you've got any updates for us on that. Is that true, or have you heard otherwise on this?
I mean, I'm against the grain here. I've spoken directly to sources at Liverpool, and they're not only surprised by the links, but one of the sources I spoke to labelled them nonsense. So I don't believe Liverpool are interested in Pulisic as a replacement for Mane or an addition. What Liverpool, like many clubs, see is the huge potential of a young player who is not entirely settled in Tuchel's system and has lacked a little bit of confidence in front of goal. And then when you compare that to his performances for the US men's national team over the course of the last 18 months, you see a different player who is displaying more leadership skills. And, only a few days ago, we saw the assist that he provided where he watched the flight of the ball, brought it down impeccably, and then had the vision to lay it off and get the assist. And clearly, over the course of the next 2 or 3 years under the right coach, Pulisic can continue that creative aspect and add a few more goals. And I think that he divides the Chelsea fan base because sometimes they see the sublime, other times they see the ridiculous. Sometimes he misses a sitter in front of goal. Other times he displays that Hazard-like quality and takes the game by the scruff of the neck. But for all of his inconsistency, his numbers even last season were not bad at all. And when you consider the different positions that he can play and his age, personally, I think he's a player that Chelsea Football Club should look to hang on to. The nationality will have nothing to do with it. So the new ownership group being predominantly American are not thinking about keeping Pulisic solely because he's American. They're thinking about keeping Pulisic because they see what he's done for the US men's national team. They look at his age. They know that if he continues to progress at the football club, he'll either turn into an even more integral part or still in a few years be very much sellable. And as a consequence, there's no reason for them to sell him unless Pulisic reveals to them that he's not happy under the current system and manager and would prefer to move. If he leaves, I think that he'll end up going to Serie A, and there's definitely some interest with Juventus specifically. But as far as Liverpool are concerned, it's a very easy conclusion to make because everybody knows that Klopp has been interested in Pulisic in the past. And naturally, when you look at the player's personality, he's quite shy off the field. He needs that arm around the shoulder. He needs some man management, that personal touch really helps him excel. And I'm not saying that Tuchel doesn't give him that, but it's obvious that Klopp is that kind of manager. So I understand why links are being made specifically between Klopp and Pulisic. But when I've spoken to Liverpool and sources at Chelsea and around Pulisic, the link has surprised people. And it may be being made because, again, everyone knows that Klopp admires the player. But as far as Liverpool as a club is concerned and shortlists for Mane, the notion that Pulisic is there to potentially replace Mane was directly branded as nonsense. So I don't think that there's as much substance to specifically Liverpool and Pulisic links as others have reported. And then more broadly, is he going to leave Chelsea? Well, when I was asked about this 2 months or so ago, before the new ownership group came in, the message was very much that he wants to remain settled, particularly in a World Cup year. He doesn't want to risk new surroundings, new club, different move. And the only caveat to that is game time. So Pulisic knows how integral he's going to be to the US men's national team in Qatar and wants to ensure that each season, given the age he's at, he continues to evolve, get more game time and be more integral. So if the feeling is that next season he takes a backward step at Chelsea, and because a player can't assess the first half of the season in a World Cup year and as readily move in the January transfer window, that's the only nagging doubt that might make him say, should I jump ship now to a club where I know I'm going to be playing week in, week out and be highly integral? And it's like a quirk almost of Qatar 2022, because usually a player that's happy enough, especially under a new ownership group that may well be keen on offering him new terms, usually the player would just say, I want to be settled. I want to play through pre-season. I want to see how I get on. I can always move in January. But now it's the opposite. They can't or won't move as readily in January because they'll be preoccupied with the World Club. So maybe players that were thinking about it in January will start deciding earlier and more impulsively this summer. So everything's set and in place so they know where they stand leading into that 6 months as we build towards the World Cup. And that might be a factor. But the truth is with Pulisic, at the moment, I don't think he's decided. I don't think anything is clear. He's certainly not intimated that he will leave. He's aware of interest from Serie A and other clubs, but nothing has progressed to the point where you can say definitively he is going to be a Chelsea exit. And then when you look at, to your point from earlier, how many others are going to be Chelsea exits or need replacing, I think if you look at it from Chelsea's point of view, I don't see Thomas Tuchel, unless he's out of nowhere, offered a Raheem Sterling. Yes, Dembele could come over the line. Will that impact Pulisic? You'd have to say to some extent. Ziyech has obviously come in, over recent months. So there are players in his position. Chelsea do have options there. But if you're going to be saying that Christensen's going, Alonso's going, Rudiger's gone, Kante is likely to exit or is past his peak, Jorginho's future needs assessing, Lukaku's going to be out the door. Are you really going to take a young 23-year-old in Pulisic, even if there's cover in that position, and say there's another one out the door? Because that's a big exodus to Chelsea's spine last season. And why bother when there's just so much potential there from Pulisic? So I think the smart thing is to try and keep him at the football club. And my understanding remains that he is perfectly happy to stay, but does want some guarantees about where he fits.
He wouldn't be my first out the door, personally, out the forward line. I know Lukaku would definitely be my first out the door after everything he's done. We're going to talk about him in a bit. But in terms of the other personnel that we have there, we've got Timo Werner, we've got, like you said, Hakim Ziyech. They would be two players that I'd probably look to put in, if we were to sell. And I agree, I think where we have got so many areas to sort out, getting rid of more players gives you more problems. Probably not the best thing to do at this point. Pulisic for me shouldn't be the first out the door. For me, he's in the pecking order of maybe like the third person. So I'd put Werner and Ziyech first, but we'll see what happens with the forward. That's going to be interesting because the one thing that I feel that we were let down massively last year when you look at the forward line was consistency in their performances. And it was like Thomas Tuchel wasn't very sure on the free to play, and he kept switching. And we saw so many different frees in many ways. And I feel it can still potentially become an issue moving forward, but maybe bringing in someone who we're going to talk about next, which is Dembele from Barcelona. Maybe that helps the forward line in not only from a creativity aspect, but also a chemistry aspect. And that's why I feel someone like Pulisic, who could potentially play off the left. I know some people feel that Mason Mount will sort of lure to that position, and it will give Pulisic problem games. But moving on to Dembele, because he's one player that has been heavily linked with Chelsea. Originally, it was PSG, and then obviously all the malarkey they've got going on there with Pochettino, Leonardo, and whatever leaving, etc. And then it seems like Chelsea have seized an opportunity to maybe bring some interest our way. And obviously he's linked with Thomas Tuchel. Apparently Tuchel's been in the conversations with Dembele as well. I mean, is there any more new or fresh updates in regards to Dembele to Chelsea?
Only that Chelsea are confident of signing Dembele. The deal is not done. It's not guaranteed. And the reason for that is because Dembele's original desire was to go to PSG. So if he had 3 offers on the table, which he doesn't, Chelsea, PSG and Barcelona, Dembele would pick PSG. But as you've alluded to, the signing of Dembele to PSG was based upon the strategy of Leonardo, and Campos coming in doesn't quite see him as the same fit. And then nobody really knows at the moment what's going to happen with Pochettino, but the feeling in France is certainly that his days are numbered at PSG. So it's quite an unstable club to be entering into, and there's nothing concrete from PSG yet to get that deal over the line. And now Mbappe's decided to stay. PSG may look to strengthen other areas, although I think that Dembele and Mbappe would play really well together. So that's opened the door for Chelsea. And make no mistake, Thomas Tuchel would like to sign Dembele. He sees him as a strong option on the field, but there's still question marks over his mentality in the dressing room, the fit in the football club, and the injury-prone nature that unfortunately he's suffered in seasons gone by. And these are all considerations. Barcelona are going to have to offload, and that also plays into Chelsea's advantage. But if I was Tuchel and I was Chelsea, I wouldn't only be looking at the footballer and the potential, and that's clearly all there, only 25 years of age. I would also be looking at the way he's handling the exit and factoring that in. So from Barcelona's perspective, they feel like Dembele's people have just gone silent and there's been a deal hanging that he could sign for months. And yet the communication has broken down. Xavi and Dembele have had a slightly fractured relationship by all accounts. So Chelsea just have to be careful that if they sign Dembele, they get the best out of him. It's really easy to get excited by the possibility of Dembele. And I do think that he would count as a marquee signing. But the last thing you want to do is have a player that rocks the boat in the dressing room. So it's about signing him and making sure that he buys into the Chelsea culture and gets a new lease of life. And a new lease of life is necessary. And and again, I know they could play together on different sides and so on. If you compare Pulisic to Dembele, I think you'll find that Pulisic's numbers are better. Dembele is going to give you a lot of creativity, a lot of versatility, and a lot of assists. But he still only played 21 times, I believe, in La Liga last season and scored 1 goal. Previous season was better for him. He played a few more games, and I think he weighed in with 6 or 7 goals.
Yeah.
But he's not really been at his best and most fluid since about the 18-19 season, where he got into double figures in all competitions. He almost scored 10 La Liga goals. And he was much more integral. He was much more free-flowing. So what you've actually got to do is sign Dembele for his potential, but give him a new lease of life. And that's the challenge, that is he going to arrive and just hit the ground running? And I would say the answer to that is no. So what makes this possible transfer interesting is that it's about the new ownership group backing Tuchel's gut instinct. And it's absolutely clear that Tuchel believes that he can get Dembele and give him that new lease of life. So the ownership group are effectively coming in quite cold to this possible deal and quite opportunistically, because, as I say, it looked like he was going to PSG. And now they're trying to steer Dembele back towards a trusted figure in Tuchel to get the best out of him. And I think that the terms are not going to be that hard for Chelsea to negotiate. I think there's a deal there to be done. And unless PSG see the competition from Chelsea and reignite the deal, it's a straight choice at the moment for Dembele between Chelsea and Barcelona. So then if we look at the Barcelona perspective of saying, well, we've had a deal hanging here and he's not even talking to us, it doesn't look likely that he's going to sign that deal at Barcelona. And as a result, Chelsea can swoop in. So I think this is a transfer that is very, very likely, but make no mistake, it's got a lot of sort of complicated personalities and negotiations needed. So by no means a done deal, but getting close.
Yeah, I think many Chelsea fans are expecting that to be done. Don't get me wrong. I do feel wages, like you said, may slightly be, I'd say, an issue, but it's just finding the right sort of wage, not only for himself, but for Chelsea in terms of their own wage structure. And I do feel there's going to be a lot of players that are going to be, I say a lot of players, some players that should be gone. And I'm talking about that. We do have quite a lot of deadwood that I feel that shouldn't really be here. And one of the biggest issues under the Roman era was that we kept giving these players that have hardly played for the first team these long contracts, loaning them out and still having them on our books and finding it very hard to shake them off. People like Ross Barkley are on sort of just over 5 million a year, and he's only kicked the ball 6 times for Chelsea on the pitch. Like, these are things that I feel we need to address, and that's why I feel that Todd Boehly, as much as he needs to look at bringing in the right players on the right wages, etc., and backing Tuchel, it's going to be as important to make sure that we try and also just flushes as many of the players that we don't really utilise or use. And whether that means that the whole loaning process changes at Chelsea, when you look at how we have been run in the past with the amount of players we've had out and stuff, if he decides to start scraping, starts getting rid of most of them and get, just to sort out the wage structure and clear out the funds and stuff like that, then it's yet to be seen with Todd Boehly. But in terms of the last sort of topic I want to quickly talk about was just Romelu Lukaku, because he just seems to be in the limelight for the wrong reasons this season at Chelsea. Ever since he came to Chelsea, it was the whole thing of that he was here, he was gonna, he was a versatile player, he could adapt to the way that people wanted to use him. He'd learned so much in Italy, etc., etc. He had the interview which he decided to do. And he talks about how much he misses, Inter Milan and especially Lautaro Martinez and etc. etc. It kind of hinders not only his performances, but then across the whole squad, the unity, everything. Just for me, just didn't feel the same. Thomas Tuchel looked like he wasn't sure, in my eyes, what to really do with him. He plays him, he's not getting the best out of him. He puts him on the bench, and people are asking him to be played. And then we find out as soon as yesterday that he's supposedly been talking to coaches and players of Inter Milan over Christmas for a period, I believe, where he may have been, because I know he was injured for a little while over Christmas with Timo Werner at some point. Is this, I mean, he has to go, right? I mean, what have you heard in regards to Lukaku? Is it a certainty that he'll go? And if he is going to go, is it only Inter Milan, or will Chelsea look to utilise him and potentially trying to get rid of him, i.e. Bayern Munich, for example?
It just depends what perspective you look at. If you ask Lukaku, then it's only Inter Milan at the moment. If you ask the ownership group, they're obviously not going to just sell him out of sentiment. If you ask Thomas Tuchel, he wants a replacement before he considers selling Lukaku. But somebody like Dembele, not a like-for-like replacement, plus Broja not being sold, kind of gives him cover, at least very broadly speaking, in the forward line. It's just a complex situation. So when you break it down, you have Lukaku wanting to orchestrate that move back to Inter, but you have an Inter club who effectively can't afford him, not at market value. So then you have to either negotiate the terms of the deal, financially speaking, in a staggered manner, or you have to agree a loan deal, and then that still comes with a relatively heavy loan fee, and Inter are not in the strongest financial position at the moment. So it's not as easy as just saying Lukaku wants out and therefore Chelsea are automatically going to sell him. Sometimes you see that when a player tries to force a move. Lewandowski is a good example. It's clear he wants to go to Barcelona. He said as much openly yesterday. He's already admitted that his time at Bayern is up. So he's kind of forcing that move. But it's not as easy as this, because Lukaku can't persuade Chelsea to just let him go somewhere if it's not in Chelsea's interest. So given the fact that he's quite aggressively tried to orchestrate a move away, it is going to be quite difficult for him to stay at Chelsea and there not to be a friction or a bad blood, because at times he hasn't acted like the model professional. And yet, as I've already said, and I wrote a thread on it yesterday, Chelsea are not just going to say, okay, we're going to let you go to Inter. We paid a fortune for you, but sure, your terms, your move. They want to commercialize that deal. So there's a few possibilities. Inter are not going to find the money just to make a permanent transfer. So the most likely scenario, if he goes to Inter, is a loan deal, and it will come with a hefty loan fee. And then in all likelihood, Chelsea are going to have to subsidize some of the wages. And Chelsea are open to that, but only, and this is the key point, if Lukaku takes a significant wage cut. What's not going to happen is he's going to be able to keep earning 325,000 and Chelsea are somehow going to pay 2/3 of that. It would be a ridiculous scenario and something that Chelsea are not open to, because the whole point of getting rid of Lukaku is also to alleviate the burden on the wage bill, to allow them to bring in players like Dembele and probably another out-and-out striker. And then if you're still paying 2/3 of Lukaku's current wages, even with a loan fee, it's totally counterintuitive to the reason for getting rid of him from a financial perspective. So there could be a loan scenario, and Chelsea, as I say, in theory, are open to a wage split, but Lukaku would have to take a significant wage reduction. And it wouldn't at all surprise me if by significant, that's losing a third of his wage, if not half. I don't think Inter can afford to pay Romelu Lukaku more than 100 or 150,000 a week. So if he's on 325,000 at Chelsea, if he wants the move to Inter, he's basically going to have to halve what he earns. And then at that point, something might be feasible. And then from Chelsea's perspective, if they have to contribute to the wages during the loan, they've still alleviated the burden on their wage bill. So these are some of the considerations. But then if you offer Chelsea taking Lukaku's wishes away from the situation, the choice between an out-and-out transfer from a club that can afford Lukaku versus a loan deal where he's still connected to the club, even if there's an obligation to buy potentially, and they're paying his wages, and they're getting a smaller fee up front from the loan deal, even if they feel that that is financially viable from their perspective, it's still obviously simpler just to sell him to someone that can afford to buy him. So once the interest is there, and once other clubs realize that Chelsea are going to probably make a loss on the transfer fee, someone may see Lukaku at a bargain for 50, 60, 70 million or less. And at that point, there's a new suitor. And then Lukaku has a decision to be made, because Chelsea may turn around and say, sorry, we don't like Inter's deal. We don't want to loan you out, even if there's an obligation to buy. So you've got a straight choice now to make, Romelu, between staying at this football club, changing your attitude, and trying to win both the manager and the fan base back, or going somewhere else. Now, that somewhere else might be Bayern, because they have to replace Lewandowski, but Bayern is only really the natural link, because some people think Chelsea are going to be able to effectively give Bayern Lukaku and try and offset that against Lewandowski. But that's clearly not the case. Lewandowski is Barcelona or nothing. It's a long shot scenario of him being in seriously the Chelsea mix. So Bayern may be one suitor, but I think there'll be lots of other clubs circling around Lukaku if the price tag drops. And that's why there's still a lot of negotiation and complications to this whole scenario, because Chelsea need to assess what the market value is, what they're prepared to lose on Lukaku. So if you reduce this price tag to 40 million, then you suddenly have an Arsenal if they don't get Gabriel Jesus coming in the mix. If you put it at 50 or 60, maybe it's a Bayern. If you say we want 20 now, it might be an Inter on loan, providing he takes a wage cut. And we're still too early in the process for that full picture to be clear. And then there still becomes a point where Chelsea say, well, what if we don't sell him and we try and reform him and get more goals out of him? I mean, even last season, he still got 15 goals in all competitions. That's basically a goal every 3 games he played in. So it's not the greatest ratio for a striker, but 8 Premier League goals in 26 games it isn't bad. You look at Inter, his obviously scoring ratio was a lot better. You look at Manchester United, he was in double figures in the Premier League in both of those seasons. You look at Everton, he was in double figures. So he's actually, off top of my head anyway, if we discount the Chelsea spell in, I think it was 11, 12 and 13, 14, wasn't it? Where he played like 15 odd games. Discount that spell. Every single season, bar last season in the league, Lukaku's got in double figures. So given he's only 29, can Chelsea find a way, if they keep him, to get that 100 odd million value that they bought him for? And is it worth keeping him until at least January to see if he can hit the ground running next season? Maybe the situation and how the fan base see him makes that impossible. But I suppose the bottom line I'm trying to say from sources I speak to is Chelsea are not just going to sell him out of circumstance and out of sentiment at some kind of bargain rate because they just want rid. They still want value if he is to leave. I think he will leave, but they still need value from that sale. They're not just going to give him away to somebody. And that's the important thing to keep at the back of everybody's mind, that this isn't a fire sale like the very sale of Chelsea Football Club itself to Clearlake Boehly. You have a player that's 100 odd million only a year ago and has been in double figures in the league everywhere he's gone since his West Brom days on loan. Chelsea want value out of that sale, or he will remain at the football club.
Fair enough. Thank you very much for that. I mean, just really quickly, Gabriel Jesus, have you heard anything on that? Because apparently he's been linked to Chelsea this morning as well. I don't know how true that is. Do you feel that Arsenal have got him more than maybe Chelsea could get him potentially?
Yeah, I've seen the links, and I think that they've come from the fact that Manchester City and Jesus particularly have come to an agreement. So Jesus actually finished the season okay, but it's been felt that he was surplus to requirements at Manchester City nonetheless. Yeah. And the thing that's moved is not Chelsea specifically, it's the fact that Man City and Jesus have agreed that he can leave for a fee of roughly 40 million. And that's lower than the 50 to 55 million from maybe a month ago that City were holding out for. And when that fee was 50 to 55 million, I'm talking in pounds, although you may see fees being quoted in euros. But when that fee was 50 to 55 million, clubs like Arsenal thought that it was too high. Now that fee is going to be closer to 40 odd million, something in that ballpark. So a sort of a 10 million discount, speaking very loosely. It allows clubs to go to market because City will accept that kind of figure. As far as Chelsea are concerned, loosely on their radar. Nothing submitted, nothing advanced, no agreement, but a good option, especially if a club like Chelsea are to lose a Lukaku. The challenge for Chelsea is Arsenal are pushing harder, but also Real Madrid, Tottenham, looking at the player as well. And personally, I think that Jesus for 40 million is a bargain signing. So, Chelsea may well be interested, but there are other clubs further advanced and pushing harder at the moment, which means that Chelsea either need to catalyze the Lukaku exit situation and push because they know they need a replacement. Otherwise, they're going to lose out to an Arsenal or a Spurs or a Real Madrid, who, as we speak now, things could change, but as we speak now, are better positioned in the market to get Jesus than Chelsea.
Perfect. Ben, thank you very, very much for the insight, bringing us the insight here as well. Guys, in the chat, big up to every single one of you guys. Nearly 400 of you, streamed and tuned in with us all the way through at the moment. Thank you very much for doing so. Before you leave, make sure you smash the like button, but also make sure you go and check out Ben Jacobs on Twitter as well. It's actually in his tag here at Jacobs Ben. So go and follow him as well. And hopefully in the future, maybe there's a lot going to be happening at Chelsea. Potentially, maybe we can get you back, Ben. Maybe we can talk about it once we've got some deals across the line. So yeah, it'd be good to have you back on. And I just want to say thank you for coming on here as well. Appreciate that.
Yeah, pleasure. Always happy to come on, and let's hope Chelsea have a good summer.
I hope so, mate. We need one. We definitely need one. Guys, take care of yourself. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll be back either tomorrow or the next day. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you again very soon. Peace out.